So I was watching a little bit of the posting that you did on the piece that you did with the university called Bird Island Suite.
Yeah,
Was that last year or the year before? When did
that
you-
was, it was premiered 2019 in
Yeah.
November, so a bit more than a year ago.
And I think that what struck me most when I was watching it was at the very beginning was the poem that Don did that was titled Audience.
Yes.
And you wrote a piece
Yes.
around that. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about that? Like how?
Yeah, that it was such a fun project to work with Don McKay's poetry. I haven't done that before, and I got his poetry first, and that was my inspiration for writing. And it just gives you such a nice starting point. And I love his poetry. There's so much in there to take from as a composer. So this was a new experience for me, and I loved working this way. And yeah, this first. It's a set of 4 poems, and the first piece is entitled Audience, and it brings you into the listening, in the state of listening.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of this piece for the audience before the actual, like the rest of the piece unfolds, which is all about seabirds. And I found it such an interesting concept to write music that really zones you into the audience mode as someone who goes to a concert. Yeah.
And it's such, it's such an appropriate piece now, because that's as soon as I heard it, I was like, wow. I mean, that's just the appreciation of what it means to kind of actually sit out there and to be in the room.
Yeah.
That's really kind of what the piece was about. Is that you have
Yes.
to all be gathered together to
Right.
to really experience it.
Forget everything else that's going on, and you're there in the moment enjoying the performance. And now we know what a privilege it is
That's
to
right.
be able to do this, right?
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
really what kind of was resounded with it. Is that it was that the privilege. You were exactly right. The
Yeah.
privilege of sort of sitting there together. Right?
Yeah. And as the performer, also the privilege to be able to play for a live crowd, right? That's something I have not done since early March 2020.
What's that been like?
I miss it extremely. Luckily with the piano, I can play by myself. Solo piano works pretty well. It would be worse if I was a drummer or a trumpet player, like wind instruments. You can play solo too, but at least with the piano, you can accompany yourself. You have all the harmonic options. So I did a lot of that playing by myself, and I've learned a lot during this time. I practiced a lot. I composed a lot, but it's the communication, the live communication with other musicians. That's really what we feed on. That's why I'm in this, right? And so I've really been missing that part of my professional life over all of these months, and it's been such a relief. Last week, Jim and I got together and we started rehearsing for this upcoming tour. That was the first time I played with a real human live, right? We
In
did
a
couple
room
of these
together.
video things before, but we both said, "Wow, so nice to play with a person again."
Especially, you're so reliant on the other person in this form. Like that to try to. I'm sure there's ways to do it. Over technology, but you're so reliant on the presence of the other person
Right.
when you're playing jazz.
Yeah, it's like a conversation, right? So there is some technology that allows you to play together live, but you have to be fairly close, and it doesn't seem to work in Newfoundland. I've tried one of these programs with a friend who just lives a couple of houses up, and we had too much latency already. I think it had to go through a server in Boston or something. So
Of course.
yeah, forget about it. That did not work. So I did a couple of things where we recorded layered. So like one person records, sends it to the next person, then they record. But it's different. It's almost like if you wanted to have this conversation, but you record all of your answers and questions first, and then I come second, right? This is kind of what it is like to do this distance layered recording.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of collaborative partners, the people that you play with, probably people that you compose with as well, like outside of the province. Like, how have you been able to kind of keep those professional relationships going as well?
Yeah, that's been really difficult. Composing wise, I pretty much work by myself, and then, for a jazz ensemble, everyone is involved in shaping the piece in the end. So I come up with the structure, with the core, composition, and then it takes its shape through rehearsals and the performances. So everyone is involved, but the kind of the writing, the sheet music, that's what I do by myself usually. So I did a lot of that, but I wasn't able to try these things out. So I have a lot of finished compositions sitting ready to be played, but I can't because I can't get to the people I wanna play them with, right? So we've been keeping in touch over Zoom, just chatting, catching up, but we haven't really been able to play. So that's all waiting.
Right.
Yeah, all on standby.
How did you come to be here? You've got an amazing discography, and you've got great accolades from amazing publications like New York Times. And just tell me a little bit about. You were born and raised in Germany, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
What part of Germany?
In Bavaria, so in the south of Germany, small town close to Nuremberg. That's where I was brought up, and maybe I'll tell you briefly about my steps, how I came here.
Is there a big jazz scene in Bavaria?
It is.
Yeah.
Bavaria is big in jazz. They have Bavaria's like a province in Canada. It's called a Bundesland in German. So they have their own youth jazz orchestra that I was a member of as a teenager. They have tons of jazz camps that I took part in. We had a big band at school. There's a lot of support for arts and culture in general from the government as well, a little bit like Canada. And there are a lot of great musicians coming from Bavaria. So it was a rich scene to be involved in, especially once I was able to drive. Once I was 18, I could drive to Nuremberg, because honestly, in the small town I grew up, not so much. There was a lot of music going on at the school and such, but not at the kind of professional level I was trying to get into, right? So once I was 18, I was able to get lessons with a real jazz pianist in Nuremberg and start playing with some more professional, semi-professional ensembles in Nuremberg. So those were great experiences.
Who are your influences in Germany? Like, are they specifically German jazz influences, or are they American jazz influences?
Yeah, my influences are mainly American jazz musicians. There are a couple of teachers in Germany who have been influential to me in terms of what they taught me, but my musical idols and influences have mostly been like a lot of the legends that we all know. Oscar Peterson, big Canadian name, obviously. Everyone in Germany thinks he's from the US.
Is that right?
Including me when I was that age.
Right.
So he's Canadian. It's such a great connection to this country where I'm in now. And he was the first pianist that I really got into, that I really started checking out and transcribing. And then I knew it evolved over time. John Coltrane was one of my first big idols too. I think one of the first jazz CDs my dad got was Blue Train by John Coltrane. He had no idea about jazz, he just picked it up, and that's one of the masterpieces, right? So that was one of the early ones I listened to. So I checked out the musicians on there, Kenny Drew on piano, and then once I started lessons going to jazz camps, I got introduced to McCoy Tyner, Keith Jarrett, Brad Meldau, Thelonious Monk. I could go on and on. I love almost everything that's out there.
Was your dad a big music lover?
He's a big music lover. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think he secretly would have liked to be a professional musician.
Is that right?
As well. Yeah, he always played on the side. He had a different career, but that's where his heart is. And now, since he's retired, he has his daily practice schedule. He gets up at 6 in the morning and goes in the basement first thing and practices bass. He plays upright and an electric bass and guitar as well. So yeah, he provided a very musical home for us.
How big is your family?
4. So I have a sister.
Yeah. All musical?
All pretty musical, yeah. My sister did not go into music. She briefly studied classical piano, but then it wasn't 100% the right thing for her, so she went into physics instead. So I have so many idols, and it changes from time over time as well. Maybe one huge influence for me was Kurt Rosenwinkel, great jazz guitarist from Philadelphia. And I actually had the opportunity study with him at some point. So after I finished high school and a thing called civil service in Germany, back then they had a mandatory year in the military and you could opt out into civil service. So I did that after high school. And then after that I went to Berlin to do my undergrad in jazz piano.
Around what year was that?
That was 2003.
Yeah.
In Germany, you're a little bit older once you start your undergrad because high school takes longer.
Yeah.
So I was 21 when I started there.
What was that like going to Berlin and
it was
being
amazing.
21 and
It was amazing coming from the small town Bavaria, going to this big city. It's the largest city in Germany and also the most multicultural city. It was really amazing. And I already knew a couple of people who started in the program with me from jazz camp. So I had kind of my crowd already, and a lot of us moved into the same apartment building, and we hung out all the time, talked about music, played jam sessions, cooked together, went to jam sessions, and we were in the same program together. It was amazing. It was a fantastic time.
Huge jazz scene in Berlin too.
It's
right?
huge, yeah, and everyone tries to go there, even more so today, but it was already this way back then.
And a big American representation of jazz in Berlin, I think too, right?
Yeah, it's become more international now. When I was there, it was not as international. It was just becoming what it is now. It was starting, right? It was 2003, so that was about 14 years after the wall came down. So things were still a bit rougher in some areas, and everything was still being renovated and built up. So there was a lot of construction always around that time. But yeah, it was amazing. It was a great program. David Friedman was there, an American vibraphone player. Learned a lot from him. Hubert Nuss was my piano teacher, German. And they also had lots of guest artists coming through from the US that worked with us in masterclass settings. So that really gave me a taste of a little bit of the New York scene or the American scene.
You're a good accordion player too.
That's right.
Did you start out as an accordion player, or like piano and accordion at the same time, or did you find accordion a little bit later, or?
Kind of at the same time. We had an upright piano at home, so that's kind of what I started dabbling on a bit at first. And my dad showed me a couple of things. And then I remember I heard some kind of a Bavarian folk band at a town fair with accordion players, and somehow I really liked that, so I wanted to learn that instrument. And it was the first instrument I took formal lessons at a music school.
Right.
I think it was age 6 or something. And with 7, I added piano as well. So yeah, I learned to play accordion, piano accordion.
Good thing you did, because I think it served you well knowing how to play accordion moving here, right?
Both here and also in New York City, the accordion has become kind of a hip instrument in contemporary jazz writing.
Right.
You know, being able to deal with that instrument. I mean, the piano player knows what to do with the right hand, but operating the bellow, that's not intuitive. You have to get used to that. And then, of course, I was also able to do things with the left hand with the bass. Yeah. So I played in a contemporary jazz orchestra that had accordion and strings and percussion. It was super fun.
Yeah, there was a fellow that I met a few years back, Franz Nicolai, who used to play with a band called the Whole Steady, and he's a really good player, piano player and accordion player, and he plays in a bunch of bands in New York, and they almost play like this sort of, there's a lot of folk influence on the jazz there. Yeah. That's a kind of a big scene, right, in New York City right now?
Yeah, I don't know. Right now, the scene is pretty dead with COVID.
Yeah, sorry, yes. It's a pretty small scene right now, yeah.
So not much happening, but yeah, accordion, it's still kind of a niche instrument because it's not really that prevalent in American music culture, at least speaking about the country as a whole. It may be, in some pockets, maybe a common instrument. But it became really popular for people to use in bands, both in like a folk context and also just as a different sound color for contemporary ensemble writing without any folk relationship, just to use that reed color you get from the accordion.
Right.
Maria Schneider has it in her jazz orchestra too as a regular instrument. And then I discovered there's kind of a polka accordion scene there as well. So I did that to make money. I played in this polka band. Usually in September, October, they had all of these Oktoberfests in these fake beer gardens in New York. Like it all seemed fake to me coming from Bavaria, knowing the original thing, but this was
A lot
kind
of rolling
fun.
the eyes while you're playing accordion. Yeah. The New York jazz scene. So when you finished school, did you go immediately to New York, or did you stay in Berlin for a while, or?
I took an extra year in Berlin. The degree was a 4-year, but I kind of stretched it out over 5 years because I just wanted to have one more year in the city. And that's around the time when Kurt Rosenwinkel came to Berlin. He became a professor there in my last year, so just wanted to stretch out a bit more and be around him and work with him a bit more. And he was a huge influence on my writing and playing. And then, yeah, my next goal was to go to the States.
And what was that like? I mean, that had to be amazing. How long did you live there in New York City?
From 2008 until 2014, so 6 years.
Right.
Yeah, of course, it was a huge adventure. I've never been outside of Europe before. I did that step, so I applied for some scholarships. One of them I got luckily, and then I was able to do this. And I still remember it was a day in August, I think August 12th, 2008. I packed 2 suitcases and went on this flight to New York. And little did I know that this was the last time that I lived in Germany, right? I've been gone since then with 2 suitcases. That's all.
Wow.
That's all I had, and went to New York and dove right into this huge city, the huge scene.
And how did you kind of find your footing in New York when you arrived?
Yeah, going to school there was of course really helpful because I met other musicians who were new to town, who were doing the same thing. So my first connections were through the community at the university, Manhattan School of Music, and I also lived in this really great international student home. It was called International House. It's a subsidized dorm for international students. It was founded by Rockefeller, I think, and they have a big mission to kind of unite people. And they had lots of cultural programming. They had practice rooms, art scholarships. It was an amazing place. So that's where I met a lot of musicians as well, including my future wife.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That really worked out well then.
That really worked out well. But then you slowly you make your way through mutual contacts. You start getting to know people outside the university, and then they invite you to do jam sessions. There's a lot of jam sessions in people's homes.
Right.
Like kind of makeshift maybe with a keyboard and kind of a rudimentary drum set, and you just get together and you play for hours.
Right.
That's how a lot of the connections are made, right? And you know one person who invites you to a jam with 4 or 5 players, so you meet the other 2, 3, and then they invite you again. So it's kind of a snowball system, and you expand your circles this way, and then eventually you try to get some gigs as well to play, which is extremely hard because there's so many musicians who come there who want to try it.
It's got to be pretty cutthroat, right?
It's cutthroat, and everyone is sounding really good.
Did you have like a club that kind of became your club that you relied upon in New York?
I had a couple of clubs that I was able to play at. Some of them are closed now, unfortunately. Cornelia Street Cafe down in the Village is closed. Cave Vivaldi is closed. The Kitano, that's still open. That's a hotel that has a big jazz program. I played there. Played there a bunch, a couple of smaller venues. The German consulate also runs a concert series there that I was able to get in. So yeah, things happen, and we started traveling outside of New York a little bit as well, to the Deerhead Inn in Pennsylvania, which is kind of an iconic venue where Keith Jarrett recorded once.
Wow.
So you start making your connections to musicians and also to venues. But to get in the big ones, like to play the Village Vanguard or even smalls, is pretty difficult to.
But I mean, you caught a lot of people's attention while you were there. I mean, the write-ups kind of tell the story of it. I mean, how
Yeah. I was always very proactive as a composer and a band leader. I always try to make things happen for myself. So I started trying out different musicians for my first band under my own name, my quartet, and we went in the studio, put out a CD. It got some good press. The second CD got more press, and the third CD got a little bit more press again. So you slowly build your reputation.
Yeah.
It's hard with your debut album. No one knows you, so you kind of start small, and then it goes outward from there. So over the years, I was able to acquire some good press coverage, some good reputation. I was was working with a great publicist over there as well, who was helping me with that. So people started to get to know me that way as well as a composer and band leader, and started to respect that.
You played in a lot of variations, solos, duets, trios, quartets. There's, you put out albums like under other people's, as the composer, or even as the as the keyboardist inside those configurations, how does it change for you, like when you had to go from configuration to configuration?
Yeah, your role slightly changes, right? I mean, sometimes it changes drastically. The most drastic changes if you play solo, because you have all the roles, you have all the freedom. That's something I always found very scary growing up as a pianist. In my undergrad, you're always relying on bass players and drummers to hold the time for you. Playing solo, all of a sudden you have to do it all. So that's something I had to get comfortable with. But now I really enjoy it. I enjoy the freedom where I can go, and that I'm in control of everything. So if you get used to it, it's a great position to have, playing solo. But I also love playing with groups. You have the interaction. The more people, the more complex that gets. The more people are involved in the conversation, of course. The less solo time you get. If you're playing in a quintet, solos have to be shared between the horn players and yourself. So you get less time in the spotlight, but you get more opportunity to be a supportive musician and support other solos. And I enjoy all these aspects. That's why I like playing in all of these different size groups. They also all pose different challenges for composing, or give you different opportunities, right? I've written a lot for quintet, where you can write for two horns, you can write unison and harmony, counterpoints, and can utilize the bass as another linear instrument as well, writing lines. And so there's a lot of possibilities to write. If it gets smaller, trio, duo, you have less of these possibilities, but that also it forces you to think differently in terms of colors and orchestration on the piano, because your role all of a sudden becomes more important. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen you play a few times, and when you're talking about the colors of the orchestration, you're a piano player that really, from an audience perspective, you really almost, it looks like sometimes you're losing yourself inside, the playing kind of thing. Like you're kind of leaving us for a little bit, and you're just kind of there. And I've seen you do that in little tiny tight spaces too, where there's 4 or 5 of you, and you're almost out in the audience,
right,
playing.
Right,
I was actually telling somebody, I saw you play down at the Black Sheep one time too, where you kind of rolled around and you kind of banged away on that upright piano for a little bit too.
Yeah.
But where does your, when you're playing in those things, and the type of piano player that you are, how is it that you like to voice yourself inside of those configurations when you're sort of in that zone,
Yeah, first of all, getting in that zone is really important for a great performance. I always find that the best experiences for myself, and when I'm the most satisfied with my playing, is when I'm really able to lose myself in the music. Almost when the frontal cortex is bypassed, when music goes in the ear and then it comes right back out the hands, and you're not trying to be in control. You just try to let your body do it, and let all the things that you've worked on over the years just come out and find their way, and just let the fingers do the walking. You don't even think anymore about every single note. You hear kind of a general sound or shape, and you just let your hand find its way through. It's a fantastic experience. That doesn't happen at every concert. Sometimes you're a little bit more in your head, and you're judging yourself while you're playing, and trying to take too much control. So that losing myself, that's always my goal in a performance. That's when I feel like I can really get in there and play things that I never thought I would be able to play. And then I'm always trying to be the most supportive musician I can for everyone on stage. Always keep the full performance in mind, not just my part, but think of the whole band. What does it need right now? How can I support it best? Sometimes it's best to lay out. Sometimes it needs something from you. So I'm always considering the picture as a whole. That's one of my goals as a performer.
And as soon as you put your name on the trio, you're the first and last person that everybody's looking to, I think, for whatever's happening.
Yeah.
Like all the decisions are kind of being made, but the last decision is your decision, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's been great too, to work with a trio where that's really bringing out the piano as the melody instrument as well, right? As soon as you have horns, they usually take on the melody, but in the trio, it's a wonderful format where you have all of that melodic possibility on the piano, but you still have to support the rhythmic support from the bass and from the drums. And I've been trying to write in a way as well to use the bass as more than just an accompanist holding the bass line down, bring him out more playing lines as well, melody lines using the bow. I enjoy thinking outside of the box, trying to get new colors out of ensembles.
You moved here to teach, I guess, right?
Kind of. I originally moved here because my wife moved here to teach.
Right.
So we were in New York. She had finished her doctorate, was looking for jobs all over, some in the US, some in Canada, and this job here came up, and we couldn't believe that she won this job. Right? We could have ended up somewhere in Flagstaff, Arizona or something, That's one of the places she was looking at, or Kentucky, especially right now. I'm so glad that that we are here.
Yeah.
So after 6 years in New York, I loved being there, but I also was ready to try something new, because everyone knows how expensive the city is, how hard it is to make a life there, especially if you want to have a family. So this was a great opportunity, and we thought we'd try what we can make work out here. It was a kind of a scary step for me. I knew there wasn't a large jazz scene here. It was kind of isolated, from New York. Yeah. It was a very, very big contrast.
That's a big shift in gears, right?
It was a big shift, but I won so much quality of life moving here. I won so much time as well. In New York, I was very busy. I had to teach a lot to be able to afford rent there, right? So I was running around teaching private students in their homes and at a studio. Whenever you went to a jam session with a friend in Brooklyn, I lived in Uptown Manhattan. The day was basically spent traveling there, playing and coming back. So a lot of time gets spent on the subway and commute. And all of a sudden here, the largest commute you have is maybe 10 minutes.
Right.
So I started being extremely productive once I moved here, because I had all this extra time. I practiced way more, I composed way more. The time has slowly been eaten up by having a kid now.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And then the teaching picked up, right? I started just teaching per course, a couple of things here and there at month, and then it got more. And then since fall 2019, I have a half-time job as a professor there. So I'm teaching now on a regular basis, which I enjoy very much. So I would say it's kind of gotten better and better since we moved here, and we've really been very happy and felt very lucky to be able to live here.
It's interesting that you used the word productivity, because I think you've made, is it 3 albums or 4 albums since you've come here?
Since I've come here, I made 4 albums. That's
4
right,
albums. Yeah. And it really feels like, for the amount of time that you've been here, that you've been really in tune with the music that's played here, with the players that are here, and you've used your life here as a great influence on your composition. Even in so much that you've done, a lot of covers on folk songs and things like that here. Can you tell me a little bit about what living here how it has impacted your composition, and especially when it kind of comes to working on traditional music from here?
Yeah, I've always tried to look around me, what's going on musically, also at just taking in the scenery and the environment and trying to use this as inspiration to write music. Right? And I've done both things here. I got a little bit into some of the accordion traditional music here, especially before we had our first son, when time was still more available resource. I used to get together with Jim Payne, and he taught me Newfoundland
I've
folk
seen you guys
songs.
play on YouTube.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we've done a couple of duo things together.
Yeah.
So he taught me his music, and I taught him some Bavarian folk tunes that he was very interested in learning as well. So we had these sessions together, and we exchanged music. It was a lot of fun playing with him. And so, yeah, that's where I learned a lot of tunes and traditions, how music is played here. And I'm always curious to try out, combine things from different corners of music, from different genres. And so I started experimenting with using some of the elements that I've learned through collaborating with Jim in my jazz compositions. I was intrigued by a lot of the jigs and reels with those kind of long, never-ending melodies playing at a fast pace. That's something that's prevalent in jazz as well. In bebop, like you also have a lot of linear, fast-moving lines. So there's some relationship there, and I try to use that to combine it. And I've written a couple of originals that use that folk influence. And then for my last trio album, I also started taking existing folk tunes and try to turn them into a jazz trio arrangement.
That's really interesting. That the Houndstune that you did, the Rufus Gichard, like that does have that bounce to it, that bebop kind of bounce to it. Yeah. That's really interesting that you kind of made the correlation there.
Yes. What's difficult about, especially about the Houndstune, that it's so tonal. It locks in so strongly in the major tonalities, and it's in D major. And in jazz, you're always looking to enrich harmonies by adding tensions and reharmonizations, and that proved very difficult for this piece to find an access point to bring in these colors. Because if you just play a song as is in a jazz trio, somehow it's missing something. So I had to try to bring this harmonic richment and rhythmic complexity to the pieces somehow.
And that's, I think, is that where you also rely upon, doing different things with, like the stand-up bass to kind of add those types of elements to?
Absolutely, and I've also picked up on the sound of the fiddle. I thought, well, I have a string instrument in the trio, so I've written some fiddle-inspired parts for the bass. And Andrew Downing, who plays in my trio, he's a fantastic bassist all around, but he's extremely great with the bow and in the higher registers of the instrument. So he was a fantastic musician for this kind of stuff.
You're going to go out on the road and play with Jim Vivian,
yes,
who you have played with before.
I've played with him before. He's another person who is really versatile, and he's a really great player with a bow as well. So he's as capable to play this music as Andrew is, and I'm extremely excited to go with him on this duo tour, and we're actually going to play a couple of things from the trio album as well. That's
and I think it's kind of when the stars line up like that, you kind of have to take advantage. It's going to be a rarity for people to be able to see both of you on stage to play at this.
It is, and it's also a bit of a celebration to have Jim back here. So the reason why we're able to do this is that Jim moved back to Newfoundland, right? He was born in Newfoundland, and then he left to become a musician on the mainland, and after 40 years, he just moved back here for good. So I'm extremely excited about this, and this tour is kind of a celebration for me to have this partner in crime here now on the island. And
you've been here a little bit longer now. You're going to have to show him around a little bit.
Yeah, we'll see who shows around who. Like, people who grew up here, they know this place inside out. I can't compete.
Well, now I did see also the clip that you put out in advance of probably, I think it was probably the cold water sessions that you did, of that little clip of you swimming to that iceberg. What the heck was that?
That was in New Bonaventure, close to Trinity.
Yeah.
Jim actually, he has an aunt who once lived there, I think, so he has a connection to that too.
That was a cold swim.
That was a cold swim. So that was the summer when the album was about to be released, and I stayed there. We rented a house. My parents were there, who loved it there, and my family we stayed. And this iceberg got stranded there in front of the beach. So I thought, hey, what a better way to promote this album called Cold Water Stories than swimming in the cold water.
Now I saw you go out you went out about 20 or 30 feet. and then you stop, and then the video stops, and I was like, I wonder if we went all the way out. Did you go all the way out to the
No,
iceberg?
I know that it's dangerous, and it was pretty cold as well.
Yeah, I
so
bet.
I stayed in a safe distance and didn't want to freeze. So.
Well, good on you for going that far, I think. And I think one of the songs, too, that you had was Winter in June, which
Yes.
is a beautiful composition.
Thank you.
Up until yesterday, we probably could have had a composition called June
June
in
and
winter.
Yeah,
It was
that's
so
right,
mild out here. What do you, like, how do you, like, in terms of composing and playing and doing that here, like, what do you see in terms of the future? Like, what do you think that looks like here?
Well, I'm trying to continue my approach, kind of looking around me and taking in new things for composition. Winter in June was inspired by, you know, the mood I felt in June. I don't know when it was, 2018 probably, when I wrote this piece, and there was, you know, winter just didn't end, and
Yeah.
it just announced another snowstorm, and so I try to capture that kind of vibe, waiting for summer. But there's also something nice about being trapped inside sometimes with the weather. It keeps you at the instrument, right? If you can go out and hike and cycle and stuff, it's harder to
Right.
stay with the instrument. So going forward, yeah, I'm looking forward to more collaborations now that Jim is here. We'll probably doing more stuff, especially in St. John's, once the pubs are good to play again. I'm getting more and more into composition, also for classical ensembles. There's going to be a follow-up composition to the Bird Island Suite, again with Don Mackay, that I'm working on currently. Also looking at some more collaborations off the island, writing for some more mixed ensembles with classical and jazz musicians. I have the music ready to go for another trio album we were going to record in December, but for obvious reasons that had to be postponed. Right, I have to go to Toronto to record this, so we have to wait there and see. So that's the next immediate project, is the trio album.
Right.
Next one.
It's a real gift, I think, that you're here. That you're
Thanks
here
so
and you're
much.
working and you're composing, and I think the audiences that are going to get to see you out on the road, it's going to be a gift for them. And I really want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me and for making this tour possible. It's I can't overstate how excited I'm to be able to play live again.
The audience, eh?
The audience. It's all about the audience.
Yeah.
That's right.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.